by night. And God said, ask what I should give you. And Solomon said, you have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, although I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out and come in, and your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this, your great people? It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. Little Amanda Madigan played her violin for worship for the very first time in her 5-year-old life. When she finished playing This Is My Father's World for a special music at church, she returned to her seat, where her mother noticed that Amanda was trembling. And her mother leaned over and whispered, were you nervous? Oh no, Mama, this is not nervous, this is God. Her mother asked several more questions, wanting to know more about this experience of God that left Amanda trembling, until, finally, Amanda Madigan, all 37 pounds of her, drew herself up, looked her mother in the eye, and said, Mama, there are no words. What do we do when there are no words to express this God who causes us to tremble? History is cluttered with human attempts to express the inexpressible in visions, imaginations, images, in books, in dreams, in song. Words often come tumbling out of us, from the psalmists to the mystics, from the preacher to the folks in the pew. We all labor to give word to the inexpressible. Perhaps, though, we weep. Maybe we dance. Perhaps we hold those that we love closer to us. That's an expression of God as well. Spiritual teachers tell us that Amanda's direct experience of God in worship, her moment of being utterly met by God yet having no words, is an apophatic experience. Now, how's that for a big seminary word? Apophatic. It means to be utterly filled with God yet wordless. Theologian Carl Rahner believed that we are more susceptible to apophatic experiences of God when we're little children. We're more open to that kind of experience. And yet, experiences of God are not always ecstatic or that sweet sense of fulfillment. Sometimes there are those times in the wee hours of the morning, say 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, when we discover ourselves wide awake, as if we've been startled, not by an audible sound, but something woke us up. When God calls us in the middle of the night, we don't hear God so much with our bodily ears, but with our interior ears. Not the inner ear canal, but rather an interior ear that connects heart, mind, soul, and strength. When I do spiritual direction with folks, I often tell them that I'm listening more from right here than from up here. And as I listen, sometimes questions come up. And I don't know where they come from, because they don't seem to come from here. They come from here. I believe that God does wake people up. One of God's less endearing habits, I think. In those hours of the morning as we lay awake, hearts pounding, fears pinning us to our mattresses as if draped by a stack of lead aprons like dentists put on us before we have x-rays. And we ask, is that you, God? We find our minds maybe filled with worries for our children and grandchildren, for our parents or friends. These thoughts then escalate to worries about job security, health insurance, our financial situation, and without our bidding, without our hearts taking, let me start over again. Our thoughts escalate to worries about our financial security, our health insurance, our job security, and without our bidding, our hearts take flight to situations of suffering in places like Iran or Afghanistan, to the millions of hungry or orphaned children worldwide, to those families down on our southern border. And then our restless hearts return to our prayer, and we walk around hospital corridors in our minds, stopping for those that we know who are fighting for life or for health, and for those that are near death as well. Our pillows might be wet with tears. Can this be God? Is this then God with us? I believe God does wake us up in the night with an invitation, just like in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus told the disciples, "Wait with me for a little while." This sleeplessness, when God wakes us up to wait a little while with me, with the suffering of the world, this is different from Amanda's apophatic experience of being filled with God and having no words. This experience of God fills us with words, plenty of them, pouring out of us, and yet we feel somehow empty and abandoned, or like we don't have the right words. We feel desolate, and yes, we know that God's in the middle of it, not causing it, just waking us up to be with God for a little while. I think there's another reason, a quite different reason, that God wakes us up, beyond asking us to wait a little while with God, being awake to the suffering of the world. I think God also wakes us up to issue a vocational call, calling us to our vocation as persons and as congregations. And I'm not talking about jobs here, not necessarily the way we earn our living or raise money for the church. Our vocation is God's call on our lives. Maybe the middle of the night is God's last resort, because we have so brilliantly organized God out of our daily lives, like that Episcopal priest I mentioned who had worship so tightly scheduled that if the Holy Spirit walked in, there'd be no room for the Spirit. Sure, we go to church, we might read our Bibles, we sing our hymns of faith, and maybe we're deeply committed to the faith. Even though we may work for God and sing for God and preach for God and teach for God, and we show up for God on Sundays, maybe it's been a very, very long time since we made room for God. Poor God. The problem of failing to clear space, making room for God, is a theme as old as Scripture itself. In fact, Advent comes to mind, that no room for the inn, that no room for the incarnation that we know about at Christmas time. Pastor Kay Northcutt tells about one of her mom's more eccentric theological exercises. Her mother pores over dozens of church newsletters during the week, searching for evidence of God. And if, in the course of a newsletter, God was completely ignored in favor of church programs and rah-rah sis boom bah, as she puts it, Mom would take her indelible black ink felt-tipped marker and write, "Poor God," followed by a railroad track full of exclamation points. And she'd tuck these newsletters in the mail to her preacher daughter as a way of reminding her, don't lead a godless church. Theologian Douglas John Hall says that when the church gives into this kind of cultural busyness, we're no longer living the gospel or learning about God or relating to God. So this God, this Poor God wakes us up in the middle of the night, guiding us away from the rah-rah sis-boom-bah, and prods us toward our vocation, our calling. In the deep silence of the night, with only the sound of the dripping faucet or a baby's breathing in and out, or the sound of the refrigerators humming, keeping us company, we're invited to listen with the ear of our hearts and whisper to God, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." We read that God woke Solomon up in the middle of the night. Solomon's call, like Samuel's and Jacob's, and like so many others, occurred in the middle of the night. But at the same time, Solomon's call is unlike every other call story we can read in the Old Testament. When God called Abram, God told Abram what to do. And Moses, too. When God called Moses, God gave Moses a job description. When God called Samuel, God told young Samuel what to do. But when God calls Solomon, rather than telling Solomon what to do, God invites Solomon with, "Ask me, Solomon, for what you need." That doesn't sound like the God we know through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, 1st and 2nd Samuel. The God we find in 1 Kings has a different MO, a different modus operandi. God is trying a new approach. And who could blame God? If you remember all the stories of the Hebrew Scriptures, things just didn't work out right all the time. "And what should I give you?" God insists of Solomon. Wow, don't we all know the right answer? If a genie asks us, "What should I give you?" the obvious answer is 3 more wishes. But when God asks Solomon, "Ask what I should give you," it's a kind of pop quiz of the wisdom sort. Solomon, in today's text, we think is about 20 years old. And he's responsible for all of Israel's governing. Imagine a 20-year-old making a bid for the presidency in the United States. It's not even possible. You have to be 35. Just imagine a 20-year-old making decisions. I'm not going to go there. Excuse me. Unbelievably, instead of acting like he knew everything, acting like he knew more than he really did, Solomon quickly admits to God all that he doesn't know. "I don't even know how to come in and go out," he says. The Hebrew words that Solomon used literally are lib shemiah. A literal translation is listening heart. He asks for a listening heart. He has an impossible job description, enough worries to keep him up for nights for the rest of his life. And he doesn't ask for help, for rescue, for relief. He asks for a listening heart. We hear the word heart today and we translate it as feelings, a hallmark moment maybe. When someone tells a preacher, "You moved my heart today," the words might be accompanied with a moist hanky or tears that have been shed. That's what we in the 21st century mean when we say heart. It means something that we felt. In the ancient Hebrew language of Solomon's time, parts of the body do represent feelings. The nose represents anger. I bet you didn't know that. You ever seen somebody's nose flare when they're angry? The right arm meant strength. We read over and over again in the Psalms about God upholding the psalmist with the right arm. It's that arm of strength. The heart, though, was not the heart of love, compassion, heartsick from grief. It was representative of will or intention. Feelings, thoughts, will, strength all reside in the Israelites' understanding of heart. Help me know your intention, God. Help me know your will. wakes us up in the night to ask, and what shall I give you? Before surrendering her vocational call to pastoral ministry, Reverend Kay Northcutt was a pianist by profession, living in Tennessee. She taught piano lessons to impoverished Appalachian kids for a federal enrichment program designed to show children living in poverty how many possibilities the world has, starting with music and piano. And none of her students had pianos at home. In fact, most of them didn't even have running water and no heat source beyond a wood-burning stove. Sometimes their mamas and daddies would carry them to church, as they put it back there, to practice a real piano, because the church had a piano. But typically there was no practicing the piano in between the weekly sessions that Kay taught. The students' progress was slow, heartbreakingly slow, except for Becky. I have a cough drop up here. Do you want one?
I've got one. I just put
Okay.
one in.
All right.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It happens. All right, Becky. 6 weeks into lessons, Becky came in, sat down at the church's piano, and played a Bach minuet perfectly. The music was just pouring out of this child. It wasn't only that the notes were right, she was making music. And we know the difference, don't we? Those piano teachers and piano players, there's a difference between just plunking out the notes and making music. Kay asked Becky, "Did your daddy carry you to church to practice?" "Oh, no, ma'am. My daddy came up here to school and came to the church and looked at the piano, and he made me a play piano on cardboard that I stretch out across my mama's table, and I practice on it." It took Kay a few seconds to visualize what Becky was saying. She was saying that she practiced on a cardboard imitation keyboard that she unfolded like a map on her mother's kitchen table. Dumbfounded, Kay asked, "So, Becky, if you can't hear the notes you're playing, if the play piano doesn't actually make any sounds when your fingers play on it, how exactly did you learn this Bach minuet?" "Oh, I learned it by heart, ma'am," Becky responded eagerly. The week before, Kay had played the minuet on the church piano for Becky, showing her what it sounded like. And Becky had listened intently, committing it to that remarkable, powerful place ancient Hebrew people called the heart. Becky learned it from the inside out, using heart, mind, soul, strength, and will to learn this piano piece. "I learned it by heart, ma'am." So, the next time God awakens one of us in the middle of the night, there are at least 3 good responses to God. The first is to seek our vocation by saying, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." It might be a good way to start a conversation with God. Or second, if it seems God is asking, "Will you wait a little while with me?" then we stay awake, praying with all our hearts and minds and souls and strength with all those gathered at the heart of suffering that night. Or 3, perhaps when God awakens us to ask, "What do you need me to give you?" we can ask for a listening heart and then come gather together with others and ask God to guide us with the wisdom given. So I'm going to invite you to practice a listening heart this morning. I want you to take just a few moments and think about a name that you like for God, your higher power, the source of all. Ed Hayes says in his book, St. George and the Dragon and the Quest for the Holy Grail, that God is a millionaire of names, but no name actually truly names God. So there's no wrong name for God. But I invite you to think of a name for God that doesn't place a gender on God, like Father or Almighty. It could be Lover and Giver of Life. Just leave it up to your imaginations. Think of a name for God, something that you would call God that's not gendered in order to be as open to all of God as possible. Be sure you're comfortable with the name, a loving, forgiving, compassionate source, allowing and non-judgmental. And we're going to do a little exercise in a moment, and if you find during this exercise that you've chosen a name that you're not comfortable with, find another name that's right for you. I'm going to ask you to be aware of the intention with which you say the name for God. Make sure it's not with sharpness. Rather say it softly, gently, opening up your experience to receiving God. Let's go into this with no expectations, with no agenda. Let yourself be exactly where you are right now. And if your mind wanders, be gentle with yourself. It's okay. Just return to your breathing and saying the name of God. So I'm going to invite you to just say that name over and over again, whatever name for God, it could be God, that you choose. And just say that name gently over and over again and let's just see what happens. So right now, I want you to be comfortable in your pews. It's usually good to put both feet on the floor if you don't have them that way yet. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, do so. If not, that's okay. And give yourself a deep cleansing breath. And I invite you to put your hand over your heart. Cover that spot with your hand and say the name of God, the name that you've chosen. Say it in your mind, but imagine it going under your hand into that spot over your heart. Imagine this being a doorway to your heart. Continue to say the name for God that you've chosen and breathe that name in and out of this spot. Imagine the gentle flow of the tide on a beach. Allow silence to gently ride in as you breathe in and then breathe out, visualizing your breath carrying the name of God so that it flows under your hand and into your heart. Allow God to ask you, ask what I should give you. Hear God saying that. Ask what I should give you. You might ask for a listening heart, or there might be something else that you're wanting or needing right now. What should I give you, says God. As you're ready, I invite you back into this place, into this time, into this space. Don't rush. We'll wait for you. When you're back here, just take your hand off of your heart and then we'll know you're here with us. Take your time. When I do things like this, I usually ask if there's anybody that would like to share something that they experienced. Is there anybody in the room that would like to? Could you hear God? Did you rest comfortably? Was your mind going crazy? Anybody like to say anything? Okay, I encourage you to share with someone, sometime today, something that happened to you this morning. chosen the hymn, Here I Am, Lord, for our closing hymn, but I couldn't find it anywhere in your books. God chased me with that hymn for years. Here I am, Lord. And in this hymn, we're reminded that God hears the cries of the people, that God's hands will save. And our reply is, here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I've heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you'll lead me. I will hold your people in my heart.
It's in the back page.
Is it really? I couldn't find it. All right.
Well, it's not listed.
Anyway,
It's an index.
it's a great hymn, and as I said, God's chased me. I've heard that song, I've turned on the radio, and there it was. I've turned on my own tape recorder, my own tape player, and there it was, the first song played. I've been in a church where the second hymn, people got to pick what they wanted to sing, and they choose, Here I Am, Lord. Our hymn this morning, though, I chose instead was Hymn of Promise, and I chose it because of the hope found in the words. And I think that there's people in this world right now who are not experiencing hope. And I think, like my daughter and son-in-law, they're on the edge of hope right now. They're going to be okay, they know that, but it doesn't feel like it. So I thought we would sing the Hymn of Promise for them this morning. So let's stand together and sing the Hymn of Promise, number 44 in the loose leaf.